Morning, everyone. Let's see, it's 10 o'clock. So if you meant to be at the Regional Electric Vehicle Fast Charge Plan Working Group Kickoff, you're at the right place. And we're going to do this a little, this is hybrid. So I'm going to be hybrids in here talking to you all and trying to face everybody. I don't know exactly how to do it. Cameron's going to drive the computer. And I think we can begin with just share screen right immediately. The agenda is embedded in the PowerPoint. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, the first part is just an introduction, just who's here and what your interests are. I think I posed the question simply of what is the extent of your knowledge of EV and EV infrastructure and what has happened in your community, if anything, and what is planned in the community. You can go right to the first slide. Oh, yeah. Yeah, okay, so everyone out there in the virtual land, this is the exact copy of the agenda. It's what was in the email to you all, and we have a hard copy here. So
we're not seeing the agenda, we're just seeing the PowerPoint like application window.
Okay. Hold on, give us just a second.
We just got a brand new TV, so we're working on some
that's great.
difficulties.
Yeah.
Big screen TV. Slideshow. Yeah, there we go.
How about now? Can you see the agenda on the screen?
Got it.
Yep, we see the
Yeah,
slideshows. Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, so it's just a more eloquent version of the one that was in the email that we sent out to everyone. But again, and I'm going to start paying attention to time. We're 4 minutes in here. So what we'll do is we'll just go around the room here in person. I'll start with George.
Yeah,
and we'll work our way this way and just introduce yourself, who you represent, and again, the extent of EV and your interest in your.
Yeah, okay. George Sears, Planning Director, Town of Derry. And we've had it in Derry before, and we can talk a little more in detail in a few minutes, but we had it, we don't have it. But there's some reasons behind it that I tied in, but there is still an interest in the town of Derry to hopefully pursue this again, so.
Great, but nothing currently underway?
An interesting sidebar from yesterday's town municipal election. There were a couple of people that got reelected, or one new incumbent and one reelected, that are, I think, are supportive of this. So with the changeover in the council beginning in April, it's a possibility that we can bring this topic up again to them. And you know, we had 2 stations in Derry from Tesla, and as you know, Carl knows, they stopped doing it. The cost went up, so they put it on hold, and they said they would look at it again. So hopefully, with the new election, they'll look at it again.
So you had Tesla, and you had Chadmo, and you had quite a bit level 2 chargers.
Yeah. So,
Joanne.
Hi, I'm Joanne Duffy, Planning and Economic Development Director for the town of Goffstown. To my knowledge, we do not have any charging stations in town, none that I'm aware of, and there hasn't been any discussion at all about it. I previously worked for the town of Hooksett, and at one point in time, the state had money and they were looking to do some location along the corridor through Hooksett. And I did work with them and try and locate, try and approach businesses to see if they were interested. And then we did find a location, but eventually it didn't work out. But the thing that I remember most is that they wanted a location where there was lots of traffic, but also people, whatever location it was at, that people would stay there. So, you know, a grocery store or something that where people were there for a while, or an office building that was very busy or something like that. But
Who was the entity? Was it private?
it was the state.
Oh.
Yeah, the state had money from somewhere, and probably the federal government, and they were charged with adding various locations to the existing, and they wanted it basically along the 93 corridor.
Right.
At that time, but
In Hooksett.
in Hooksett, but it didn't work out because we found a location at Walmart, and Walmart was willing to do it. However, the location had to be, because of fire codes, the
Right.
location had to be away from the building, and it just didn't work out as far as hooking up the electrical. But we got far with it, so I have a little experience.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's, you know, how challenging it can be.
Yeah.
Okay, Jillian.
Jillian Harris, town of Bedford. And what we've seen in Bedford has really been driven by private development so far. We've got a few stations, one that was just put in at the Maria gas station that opened last fall, and they electively put that into their program. A couple more projects that are coming online this year that are also planning to have some electric charging stations. So really the movement we've seen in Bedford has been driven by private development, but I think that I'd like to get some of the people in the municipality excited about it too.
Right, right. But currently there's not a lot of activity with municipal leadership or elected.
Not that I've seen.
Okay.
Yeah.
You guys want to introduce yourselves? Yeah.
Zach Swick.
Sorry.
Jamie Zamoyski, Regional Planner of the Commission.
And Jillian.
Jody Nazaka here from the City of Manchester Economic Development Office, and previously in planning, so I can probably speak to both sides. But similar to Jillian said in Bedford, Manchester is seeing a lot of private developments. The city doesn't currently regulate them outside of requiring their typical electrical permit. I wouldn't say there hasn't been a need for any elected officials to really get behind it because it's kind of happening naturally.
Right.
As far as I know, there's no opposition to them. I would like to see them through the subdivision site plan regulations encouraged. But they seem to be popping up in the city where they're needed most. There was a couple years ago a new installation that went in at the mall, and really all that required was just kind of them writing out on a basic little site plan and just kind of getting their standard approval from the planning department.
Were those the mall owners?
That was a combination. Yeah, the mall is a tricky site. So for the most part, the application came from the entity that was doing the charging station. Obviously, they needed sign off from whoever owned the parcel, but
Right.
yeah, it's usually a combination.
And anything currently, Jody, going on at stations? Any knowledge of the DC fast chargers or? anything going on in the
Not
city?
that I'm aware, but I can check if there's any recent approvals through the building department and see if there's any. There's a new 250 unit apartment building kind of in the inner city that got approved for market rate housing, and I think they are adding a few in their parking garage.
That's associated with the 215. Okay. In that development.
Mhm.
Okay.
I can't think of any that exist on public property. They're all on private property right now.
Okay. That takes us to everyone online. Tim and Ricky and Colleen. Tim and Ricky, you want to just introduce yourselves quickly?
Yeah, Tim White, Mobile Sources Supervisor, New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. Ricky DeSillo, Grants Coordinator for NHDES.
And I'll just emphasize for you, everybody else, that these guys, both of you are involved with the current RFP, right, Tim, Ricky? That's
Yeah.
out there.
I
Just
think
speak to
also
that for 2 seconds. Yeah.
yeah, Carl, I just want to mention, I think Jessica's also online too, so.
Oh, yeah, sorry, Jess, I couldn't see you. I had thought I'd seen you earlier. Yeah. Jess, you want to just quickly explain your role at DES?
Yep. Hi, everybody. I work with Tim and Ricky in Air Resources and transportation specialist here, and also coordinate our Clean Cities program here in New Hampshire, which works with, towns and businesses on vehicle fleets and clean transportation projects. So happy to be here.
Thanks, you guys, for being here. So we've got Colleen and Alex.
Hi, Colleen Mayu, town planner with the town of Londonderry. But currently, there's not a lot that's going on in Londonderry. We do have in our site plan regulations kind of the one-off. EV charging stations are strongly encouraged for site plans going through for approval. But honestly, we haven't actually pushed or done anything more to tell private development to do to install charging stations. Locally, the town on our side of things in terms of public facilities, I think is open to exploring, but hasn't had any real initiatives relating to EV charging. But I think is open to what we can do to promote things. I think locally in town, the only sites I am aware of are private sites. Stonyfield is really proactive, and I believe that they have a few charging stations installed up at their building. I'm not sure if any of our other larger developments up around the airport have stations. But
The airport itself does. The airport itself has a bunch of level 2s.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alex. I'm the Community Development Director for the town of Windham, and I'm fairly new to this role, so I'm not too familiar with our EV infrastructure yet. In terms of public town facilities or also private development, but I am happy to join this group and start to think about how we can improve our EV infrastructure in town. I would think that we have some good opportunities with a park and ride off of exit 3 and with 111 and Route 28. So it is my plan to start advocating for private developments to start including EV charging stations as part of their site plan approval. So happy to join this group and help out any way that I can.
Yeah, Alex, welcome. How long have you been with Windham now?
I started in August 2021. So
okay.
It's been a fast 7 months so far, but yeah, so happy to be here.
Yeah, welcome. We look forward to meeting you in person too, of course.
Yeah.
All right, you can just cue to the next slide. So we just covered this, and I covered when infrastructure exists or being planned for in your community, or not yet. Next slide. Thanks, Cam. So the goals for this project, and you can cue it again. I think there's a bunch of the things that drop down here. We haven't established all of the guidelines entirely with this project yet. We've you'll see as we go through this PowerPoint that we've, we'll identify the routes, the routes across the state that the state itself has identified as priority corridors. We have preliminarily for this project listed a bunch of the natural routes, the 114, 101, 102, 112, et cetera, mostly state routes. But the question is, really, do we limit ourselves to just state routes? The legislation that approved a whole bunch of funding recently says I think it's eligible on local roads as well. I'm not positive about that, but I know there's a lot of emphasis around other routes. The state is kind of wed with the VW money, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, to the designated corridors. I know that there's eligibility round right now looking to expand that to other corridors, which will allow for expansion of those charging stations to be located on other routes. Big one is distance between. I think when we're looking at locations, we're going to be looking at some logical places where they should go. But I think, Jess, it's on the designated routes, no more than, is it 20 or 50 miles proximity to each other?
So a little clarification, because there's
Sure.
two buckets of funding, right,
Yeah.
that the state is ultimately going to be able to tap into. The Volkswagen funding has some requirements that differ from the funding coming through the infrastructure bill. So ultimately that funding through the infrastructure bill is going to be kind of the overarching. In order for us to tap into that federal funding, we have to follow that specific criteria, which is that there's, like you said on the slide, 4 DC fast charging stations per site, that the distance is no further than 50 miles apart on the interstates or the national highway system. When we talk about the VW funding, which that funding opportunity just closed, those applicants were being held to proposing DC fast charging with level 2. Unless they could justify a reason why level 2 didn't make sense. And the VW funding also pulled out 9 of the designated corridors from the overarching, like New Hampshire has all of these federal highways designated corridors. The VW funding focused on a select few of those, whereas the funding coming through the infrastructure bill is going to focus on all of them with a priority on the interstates initially.
So the only thing I would add to that is the DC fast charging RFP specified that it was going to use about $3 million out of the 4.6 million, which was the 15% set aside for EV charging for the state's allocation of the Volkswagen funding. So conceivably, in addition to the DC fast charging RFP, which, by the way, we were really, really pleased with the response to in terms of the proposals that we received, in theory, there would be about $1.6 million left of that Volkswagen money that we could utilize for an additional funding opportunity, although I will say at this point that we don't have any specific plans or timetable for doing that, but that money is in theory still there. So
that's another 1.6 of the remaining VW funds.
Yep, correct.
Something here I wanted to cover was, and I can't remember if it's the next slide, we get into the mapping, the designated corridors. Route I-93 south of Manchester is currently not a designated corridor, is that correct?
No, I believe the entire length of I-93 in the state is a designated corridor. I believe it's been designated for EV. Yeah.
The reason I said that, Tim, is because just keep going. There's a map on the map of the state. Yeah, keep going. Just
the mapping, unfortunately, is not real clear.
This one. Yeah. Okay. This one.
Oh, okay. Yep.
It might just be an old map. It's the one you find, and that's the one I've been using. And so this is probably outdated.
Yeah, I'm actually looking at the link to the Federal Highways Alternative Fuel Corridor website, and the one that you've got, yeah, could be an older version. But in your region, I mean, we're basically looking at I-93, which is EV designated, 293, and 101.
Right, 101 through. Okay.
And then
Carl, I just put a link in the chat for Federal Highways corridor map, and you can zoom in on New Hampshire to see the existing corridor layout.
And I think Jessica may have already mentioned that there is another opportunity coming up now to designate additional corridors. The Federal Highways guidance pertaining to that opportunity is basically saying that we should focus our efforts on the interstate corridors. So in terms of, this region, we're pretty much covered, but I think we're still considering adding or nominating corridors that aren't interstate corridors. So I mean, that's probably just about where we are right now with that process of developing a nomination package.
Okay, because part of what we're going to do here in a second is just go over the corridors that I kind of mentioned earlier, and just talk about if there are others that we've missed, or what the extent should be for our analysis. And then related to that, it would be which ones are eligible for which sources of funding currently, or which ones should we be seeking designated corridor status for eligibility. Cam, I'll just have you go back. I'm sorry, about 3 or 4 slides, whatever it was. Yeah, okay. So the real meat of this task for all of us and for all of you is going to be where to locate along the routes. Once we've established the routes, we've already done a preliminary analysis of parcels and different kinds of logical places to locate them, gas stations, community property, community centers, and so on and so forth. but we're curious about what else should we be including in our, what should we be targeting for the types of properties or types of locations. And then, you know, what is the relevant and necessary infrastructure? Therefore, what kind of research do we have to do to locate these? And one of the big ones is three-phase power for DC fast charging, and kind of the how do you charge for it? Do we work with a private entity, or do we do something with a municipality or a private entity to have separate meters and things like that? So we haven't developed any of these prioritization factors, but that's kind of part of the discussion, is how would we prioritize? You know, is it distance? Is it ease of access to work with a municipal partner, or work with a private partner, or a willing private partner? There's a bunch of different criteria that we can come up with. There's also criteria that DES has for their locating, and so we can kind of look at those, not today, but what, just kind of get an idea of what you think is important as far as the research and the analysis, and finding locations that we should work for, you know, move forward on, or at least include in our analysis. I can go to the next slide. And just high level for those who aren't aware, there are 3 levels of charging. We're mostly focused on the fast charging. These are the ones where you can plug in and charge 20 to 30 minutes, depending on the power capabilities. And that'll give you 90 to 120 miles of range per half hour, perhaps more, depending on, again, the level 2 is kind of the the longer term overnight. That's the one that George had in Derry, and exists in a lot of places. This is, you know, where you're going to park for a number of hours. This is 20 miles per hour. My home charger, I can get about 30 miles per hour. That's of 30 miles of range per hour of charging. And level 1 is if you buy an EV, they come with basically a plug-in. You can plug it in at your house. It's just a regular, you know, plug. And this, again, gives you an optimistic of 4 miles per hour. My experience with that is about 3 miles per hour. So when I come drive here and park, if I work 8 hours, I'm lucky if I've got 25 miles of additional charge over that time. So it says best for homes. Level 1 is really not best for anything except if that's all you have. If you travel to somebody's house and they don't have the infrastructure, you can plug in your car, pull out the extension cord. It's got a special, you know, it's special piece, and plug in and not quickly set it up, and then wait 3 days till you're charged fully. So it's not really ideal. We're really focused on the fast charging for this project, but as just mentioned, we're also interested in co-locating level 2, which you know, the one at Whole Foods in Bedford is a fast charger, but also has a level 2. So if the fast charger is occupied, you can plug in, and if you're there for an hour, you might get 30 miles of charge. Next slide, Cam. It's stuck, everybody, at least on our end. There we go. This slide I included just to give you basics of the DC fast charging. I think everyone's familiar with plugs. The Tesla has its own proprietary charging plug, and it's relatively sophisticated, provides the most range. This is added range per minute. So every minute it's saying 5 to 9 miles. That's amazing. Getting up to an 80% charge, which is kind of a critical measure, takes 20 to 40 minutes with a Tesla, the CHAdeMO, and the combined, the CCS charger, which is a DC combined with, I think it's just traditional AC, can charge you up in about a similar amount of time, but generally my experience with it is it can take even more than 60 minutes to get to an 80% charge. So you can see why it's valuable to have the fast charger. You go into the grocery store for 45 minutes or whatever the average time is, and you can basically get, you know, 50, 70 miles at least, depending on which charger, maybe less with the 60-minute charger. So that's kind of, you know, this is the beta and VHS era where there's a bunch of different ways to interface with charging infrastructure. Tesla's, again, proprietary just to Tesla vehicles as far as I know. CHAdeMO, I believe, is a Nissan technology partnered with someone else, and then CCS is kind of becoming, it seems like, more the DC fast charging standard, it seems like. Next slide, Cam. All right, you can go to the next slide. We already covered this one. And anybody who saw the overview we did, I did a few weeks ago, Hampshire's kind of a donut hole in the region, although, inland Maine doesn't have a lot of charging either. But along the I-93 corridor, the White Mountains, there's not a lot of charging opportunity, even with level 2. There is some, but we're going to be focused, of course, on our region, which, next slide again. Thanks, Cam. I have another map. I think we'll look at it. That just shows there's not a lot here. There's some level 2 throughout the region, but there's only a handful of the fast chargers. Okay, so we've covered all this, and I want to just show you quickly some of the mapping that we've done already, and have Zach go over some of the methodology. Zach? We've developed a bunch of maps on the corridors that we've identified that we're targeting right now. And I'll cover those through the mapping.
I want to stop sharing.
Yeah, just jump.
Or is it? They're not in the presentation, right?
They're not in the presentation. Well, yeah, click one forward. They're not. The idea was to be able to. Yeah. So I'll just cover this one. So this is the map that kind of shows the entire region and the corridors that we've started with. And it's not just corridors. We're also looking at areas within, I think it's a quarter mile, Zach, of interchanges. And we know that the interstate is included in the state's priorities, but we're just doing some additional analysis in those areas, especially along 101. And we're well aware that we need to coordinate with the state and whoever is awarded the various contracts through the RFP process. But what we're doing so far really is looking at areas within a quarter mile of the roadway, and then we've identified a lot of logical locations so far. And this is not an extensive list, but this is, I think, what we've started with, which includes grocery stores, gas stations, convenience stores, community type properties with municipalities, centers, libraries, town halls, etc. And then other places where people park for a number of hours at higher education, schools, mostly community colleges and universities, medical centers, and then also parking structures and park and rides. And now I'll let Zach can go into the actual GIS here and kind of give you take a closer look at some of this.
Okay. It's going to be a little funky, everybody, with you online, because I'm sharing a couple different things. So every time I share, I'm going to have to pull it back up again. So So this is the map we were just looking at. As you can see, it's the corridors of, it's a quarter mile from, quarter mile from highway exit, and then 101 west of Manchester through Bedford, and then the state routes of 111, 102, 114, and US 3. These are the different components we're looking at initially. For grocery stores and gas stations, these are within the area of interest, which is that quarter mile. The rest of these, town halls, libraries, higher education, large medical centers, parking structures, parking rides, those we're going to consider if they're outside the area of interest. In some cases, we have whole towns that don't have any area that's within that quarter mile, and so this is to give them potential locations within their own town. So you can see like Francistown, New Boston. New Boston does technically have a little strip here, but the actual village center would be a better location. And so you can see that a lot of for the state routes, we already have a number of different potential points along here. So in Wyndham here we have gas station, park and ride, and then along here a whole bunch of different stuff, grocery stores. Stop sharing. And do you want? I'm just going to go ahead and pull up. Here's an example.
And one of the questions we have, what have we missed? What are the other type of places? One that I've thought of is parks, like green parks, like a place where you go to recreate, or the Audubon Center in Auburn would be potentially one. Which is
also retail centers.
right.
The Targets, Home Depots.
Yeah.
Did you mention hotels?
No. Can you all see the online? Can you see this map?
It's exit 5 on 993.
Yep. Yeah, I can
Okay.
see it.
So here's an example of, here's exit 5 on 93, quarter mile of the exit. Within there, we have, the park and ride, and then we have 3 different gas stations. And this is an example of one that's, kind of, I'd say about half built out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's, it has established businesses and stuff like that, but you can also see there are large, unused parcels still within relative, easy
We
access.
assume they're not completely constrained by, this is the next level. This one's kind of unique because it has an existing parking right at it. So it seems like that would be a lot, and 2 gas stations, three gas stations. And there's a trail. So it was a good example of, there's a lot going on here. I assume there's 3-phase power here, for example.
Yeah, there is, and there is development potential in those vacant parcels, along Vista Ridge, as a mixed use commercial zone. And I think, in this type of area, I almost see this as sort of we should be targeting that, getting private development to be incorporating into, when we have parcels that are not developed yet. And if, I'm anticipating some sort of a mixed use multifamily commercial development on Vista Ridge, incorporating EV charging stations just as part of the site plan process, maybe rather than a parking ride. I think the concerns with the parking ride are, if you're leaving your car there all day versus, kind of the quick, charging for 20 minutes and then coming back, I guess leaving a car there, kind of taking up the charging station all day would be a concern. But I mean, this area, I mean, selfishly, I think Londonderry would be great to try and get things here or down at exit 4, in the Woodmont area where, again, you have, folks coming, are going to be there shopping for a while and taking advantage of the chargers.
Say, park and ride here might be a better use for level 2, the sort of thing where you pull up, plug in, go to work, come back, and when you come back in the evening, your car is charged.
Well, I imagine with signage, you could say even though it's a park and ride, some people may park and ride for 45 minutes, or there could be signage that says, there's a limit on how long you can park in. I'm not exactly sure what all the protocol and guidance is around park and rides, but you could have some that are longer term level 2 chargers if you're gonna be there all day. And you could have some that are specifically, hey, this is a quick charge station. It's not a spot to park for the day. It's a spot to, sit and get your car charged or something. But that's why it makes more sense at.
Here's another example of a largely built out area. So this is Manchester. This is between exits 4 and 5 on 293. So you can see 293 running down the middle with the river. And within this one area, we have actually we have all the different areas that were all the different types that we were looking at initially. We have gas stations. We have medical centers with Elliott at the river's edge. We have a grocery store, so Market Basket. We have 2 parking garages, UNH Manchester. So just an example. Snoo, yeah, the Snoo's parking garage. So you can see that, in this one area, we have a lot of different options. And then lastly, I'll just look at the. Lastly, we'll just look at a more rural example.
Yeah, this is the 114 corridor up through where.
Okay, so here we have, here's 114 in Ware Village. And, within this particular corridor, we don't have a lot of commercial opportunities existing, there's not a grocery store, large grocery store. There is one gas station, but there are, a number of different public offices, all, very close to that corridor, library, town hall, town offices, and right along there. There are, and other areas in the town where there are other gas stations that work as well. So this would be, an example of a rural area where, luckily for where the entire corridor is available to them for us to look at. I think that's it.
Okay, great, thank you. I maybe go back to the big map and just zoom in if we need to. So, what we wanted to do now was really just to, again, we started to cover what are we missing as far as the types of locations, and what we want to, how would we identify locations that are maybe only have 1 or 2 fast chargers and a bunch of level 2s versus a place where we say this is a location that is logical for 4 or more. Let's start with 4 fast chargers, but also develop the infrastructure with that initial installation where you could go to 8 or 12, or you could really expand it out. But the first one was really just what criteria are we missing as far as what we're looking for. The big one, I believe, Jess, Ricky, and Tim, is the availability of level 3 power. And we're working on getting the mapping for that. I'm not sure if any of your communities have knowledge of where that is.
Probably not.
But Cam's working with some contacts at Eversource, and we're working those angles to try and get all that. Otherwise, we're going to have to just go out and do a survey in the field and actually look at the power lines and see what's there. But that is kind of I believe the kind of the floor of what the need is for doing fast charging. Other things would be like, again, what are we targeting? We're looking for opportunities with public properties or private undeveloped or private existing. I don't know, just what are we missing? And I'm asking, everybody in the room and also out there online, what other types of places should we be including in this? Because we can't do every mile or every half mile or quarter mile of linear along each of these routes. Obviously, we need to find the places that are the low-hanging fruit, biggest opportunities. And this was our first cut at it. So I'll just leave it at that for now. Any ideas what we've missed? I know Jody mentioned, obviously the retail. I knew about Targets. Some Targets already have fast chargers, but there's not a lot of Targets. There's a lot of supermarkets, which we included, but
I'm thinking like out in California, someone mentioned they usually place them in areas where there's a lot of things for people to be doing, not just grocery shopping. And I like what Tammy said about hotels, although hotels might not make them public. I think it might be reserved for guests only.
Is there like an inventory list to say where they are located currently?
oh yeah. I actually have a link in here.
Okay.
Back in the presentation to PlugShare, which is where some of the images we got of where they currently are located.
Okay.
Yeah, plugshare.com, I think is their website. And that's a kind of I believe it's a crowdsourced website, or the people that have them work with them, or people that find them then post them, I believe. I'm not exactly sure how PlugShare works, but there's some other resource like that. And then some automobile manufacturers have proprietary locating apps in their cars that also either work with somebody's providing the data.
Carl, there's also information available on the Department of Energy website.
On locating?
U.S. Department of Energy.
Yeah, just on their locations.
Yeah, it would tell you what's available in this region.
One of the problems is sometimes the chargers themselves don't have they don't tell you if they're occupied or not, you know. You show up and you need to charge, but you got to wait 40 minutes. I'm not exactly sure how to get around that, but that's.
I think Ricky's just been kind enough to provide the link to that information. So
Okay.
About large sports facilities. Sports parks. I know I spent a lot of time at Seacoast United in their parking lot.
That's a good one.
Okay. Where's that one?
That's in Epping, but
In Epping.
They have a
Yeah.
facility in Bethlehem.
Well, like I said, you know, that wasn't, sorry, George.
No, no.
Oh, it just, parks, is one that I've thought of. They're usually, you know, public, although I know there are some private. That, you know, what other types of places that people go to and wait, but are also, you know, have the available three-phase power, have the available security. You know, downtowns are obviously great spots, but where within a downtown besides all these places that we've mentioned?
I understand the quarter-mile reasoning, but would you look outside of that?
Well, you guys went a mile from interstates and from designated corridors? Is that right?
I mean, I think the NEVI documentation is specifying 1 travel mile within the interstate. I mean, there are exceptions to that, but that's basically what they're asking us to focus on right now, which is every 50 miles along a corridor and within 1 travel mile of the interstate. And the specifications for the DC fast charging RFP were I don't recall off the top of my head what they were, but I mean, they were based on the 9 corridors that were included in the RFP.
You shared the exit 5 image, and I think the Woodmont Commons area would be a great candidate for how that's all building up, and there's multiple different stops that someone can make rather than waiting for some of those vacant parcels to be developed.
That's Londonderry, right?
Yeah.
Colleen, you had mentioned that there isn't any requirements in Londonderry yet. It's encouraged.
Yeah, our site plan regulations encourage EV charging stations to be part of project design, but don't require. And I think the Woodmont Commons PUD master plan was done in 2013, which was maybe a little bit before. Yeah. And so that doesn't even entertain EV charging stations. But I think that, you know, it would make sense to work with the developer to, you know, encourage that in those locations. So I guess my thoughts are that, well, we have places that, you know, development is that there's a potential that it's going to be, you know, private development, that, you know, continuing to strongly encourage private developers. So if we've got areas that are undeveloped or underdeveloped now, then and maybe it's wishful thinking to think that we can, you know, require or encourage them privately to include that in their design. I think Bedford's had some success without requirements, but with people, you know, developers, you know, voluntarily doing that. And so maybe our resources should be focused on, you know, the areas where maybe things are already built up and a developer is not necessarily coming in for redevelopment. So, you know, focusing on existing sites that, you know, for lack of a better term, there's no other way to get them to volunteer to do this. So if we're looking at private sites, you know, trying to find those areas that it makes sense to add them in. And then if all of us, you know, if all communities kind of try to look at what we can do to strengthen our regulatory language with, you know, requiring, and it's interesting because our parking standards, we require a set number of bicycle racks for, right, you know, each. So if you have, you know, 100 parking spaces, you need to have like 10 bike racks. So maybe, you know, we can come up with some other threshold to do something similar for EV charging stations to try and, you know, chip away at sort of the missing pieces.
Yeah, for certain uses, at least.
Something I've thought about too is, you know, in these places where that are, once you identify locations that makes sense, there's this, the thought is, you know, we'll put in the infrastructure for whatever, 2, 4, 8, but the reality is that those might, you know, in 10 years, when whatever 30-40% of cars are electric, that won't be enough. And so it's like, are we going to be digging up parking lots every 7 years to extend conduit? I don't know if I haven't heard of anybody who's had a standard about, you know, if it's a new development providing conduit to, you know, I don't even know, maybe 50% of the spaces or something like that. It's not a huge additional charge at the get-go, but if you have to tear up to allow build additional capacity over time, or especially in a parking garage. In a parking garage, it might actually be easier to run because you're just running, you know, cables along the structure.
True, versus a parking lot.
Yeah. So one question I had for everyone too is anybody managing fleets and charging fleets, you know, buses, you know, here in Manchester is the only large fixed route bus in the region. School buses and schools, where do people store buses, and are there is anybody aware of any school buses or school districts that are looking at electrifying school buses, and should we include some of those locations? Not that that's a logical place for.
No, that's a good.
Not that that's a logical place.
That's a good question.
Not, it's really not. That's the kind of like, you know, that's the beauty of planning.
Yeah.
It might be 10 years in the future, but 10 years is nothing. So,
But municipal fleets, I mean.
Yeah.
That's
Mhm.
a great starting point. A lot of communities that have started to do that in the seacoast area. And that can at least move some of them to hybrid.
yeah, at the very least, right?
I mean, you know, following up on that on the MTA, I mean, we could ask Mike Whitner, someone in the office, because, you know, with CART, it represents several of our towns use that van service. The CART's now under MTA, but that's a great point. I mean, particularly Derry and Londonderry, they get the highest two users of that van service in the region.
Carl, you might also want to touch base with the NRPC. They have a working group that is discussing the possibility of a demonstration project related to electrification of school buses in their region. So you might want to talk with them too.
Okay, that's great. That's great to know. I just, you know, Tim, have you or anybody there heard of any type of infrastructure investment with a, you know, with a school or school bus fleet that is also accessible to the public? I've seen in Maine municipal facilities, not just schools, but that are that they provide public charging level 2. But I'm not aware of anybody yet who's kind of got let's just say an electric school bus and is saying, okay, over the next 20 years, we're going to go, or whatever, 15 years, we're going to move to an entire electric bus fleet. So Nashua is really in the lead with that.
I believe the Durham Public Library has public chargers.
There have also been, and this was a few years ago, but 2 or 3 demonstration projects that were completed by some towns in Massachusetts. Jessica, can you remember them? Cambridge comes to mind, and a couple others.
Yeah, Concord was one, and I've got a contact there, but I'm not thinking of the third.
Yeah.
But I don't know that they offered EV charging publicly. I
True.
think that they were very focused on just kind of understanding how they should charge the bus fleet themselves before they started offering it publicly.
Okay.
But, you know, that is a good point though, Carl, because there is a lot of funding currently available and coming for electric school buses. And a lot of times that funding, I know with the Diesel Emission Reduction Act or DERA funding that the state gets, that an eligible cost of that is an EV charger for each electric vehicle. So a lot of times it goes hand in hand.
So you get awarded funds for a bus or whatever the vehicle is, and the charger comes. That's great.
Yeah, the charger is something you can gain that cost share, that match from the funding towards. It's an eligible cost. So, and then there is EPA is going to be coming out with funding supposedly late this summer for a clean school bus program. 5 billion is going to be released nationwide. So I anticipate that will include, you know, an eligible, that the charges will be an eligible cost for that funding as well. So thinking that way is smart.
Okay.
Carl, going back to location citing, this is a bit outside the region, but if every state liquor store included them, then you'd have a seamless connection up north.
I love it.
I mean, the state liquor stores have location parameters that, you know, they want to be located in certain areas, and they pretty much are located off of all major exits on the way up 93.
You know, it's funny you say liquor store, and the thing I love about New Hampshire is liquor stores are the de facto rest stops in the state of New Hampshire. It's some, you know, but that is one I had not thought of, even though, of course, Hooksett tolls, as I refer to it, it's, you know, I'm like, oh, that stop is a logical one.
And I think it seems like they're going in the direction of closing some of their smaller stores and opening up larger ones in more populated areas. So they closed 2 smaller ones in Manchester and then opened the bigger one off the highway near Walter.
So it's interesting. Are they building new? Are they closing the small ones and upgrading, building larger ones?
Yes.
Seems like, yeah, exactly. They did it on that. They did it in Portsmouth.
I mean, they closed the one in Derry because it was one of the lower performing ones.
Right.
And I think they said go to exit 5, and they upgraded the one at the diner there, which is extremely popular. I mean, that's where I go, So, but they look at those locations. But interesting, the one in the statement was in the Hannaford Plaza. So you'd think there'd be a built-in market there, but it just wasn't performing in terms of sales revenue, and they closed it. But you go to exit 5, and there you are right on the highway, you know, in Londonderry.
Okay, well,
So
we'll add liquor store.
The only problem,
That serves many purposes.
the only problem with the liquor store is you're not going to be there for 40 minutes.
There's so much I could, I was just gonna say, there's so much I could comment on, but
if you're at the diner, Zach.
I know it depends on what kind of electric vehicle you have, but Tesla's, it's pretty easy to sit in your car for 45 minutes.
Yeah.
And watch a movie. Or
I'd like to weigh in real quick and say, it's not always right to think of, can you get a full charge out of this? Because when you get home, if you're plugging into your house wall outlet, or even if you have a level 2, or if you're going to go to work, you're not going to need a full charge to get home. If you're going in for 15 minutes to shop for something and you can just top off or just get yourself a little bit more, that can be really valuable too.
no, it's a huge point, Ricky. I mean, you know, coming over from Portland to here in the winter, I mean, in the summer, I can make it from Portland to Manchester and back on a single charge in my Bolt, but this time of year I can't. But I can get, there's a fast charger in Kittery. And sometimes I can get here into Kittery,
Right.
if it's not, you know, 0 out, if it's, you know, only 25. And I only need 50 more miles, so, or 30 more miles, you know, so it's a really good point that you don't have to do a full charge necessarily.
Oh, can we, sorry, go ahead, Julie.
When the Hooksett rest areas were built, they did install Tesla chargers.
Right.
I'm assuming they're still there.
Teslas are there.
Just on the east, the northbound one is there because I drove past it the
I
other
think
day.
they're at both. Yeah, they're on the south side.
Okay.
But I don't believe there are any non-Tesla fast chargers there.
No, I think they had an exclusive agreement at the
Wow.
time with Tesla.
Wow.
This was
Yeah.
Alex Ray and
Yeah,
Good old Alex. Okay.
right, it was exclusive, Julie. Question going back to
Yeah.
1, do we know, just curiosity, that how many there are out there? Because you make a great point about level 1, how long it would take you to charge the car and how many miles you get out of it. But
Right.
going back to locations, if you look at like exit 5 at the parking lot, and I've done it, like if you want to take the train to Boston or go to South Station or Logan Airport, I've done it several times. I park at exit 5 and I take the bus
Right.
down to Logan or to South Station. And they designate, as probably Colleen knows, short-term and long-term parking. And you see long-term there that can go for weeks, and then you take a long weekend or a day trip to Boston. Wouldn't there be an advantage of having level 1 in those types of locations, or are we just, it's level 1, I know it's level 1, but is it popular, or is you say, no, it's not really going to be beneficial?
Well, when I think about level 1, again, it's, you know, like that's plugging into your wall. All they would need to do is provide plugs.
Plugs, okay.
Just an outlet, excuse me, when I say a plug, I mean an outlet. because again, if you have an EV, it generally comes with that. You can just plug it in.
Yeah.
It's basically, we call it a trickle charge because it's so slow.
Yeah.
But that's an interesting idea, because some people, if you're in long-term parking, then it's, it's like plugging in a
Yeah,
hairdryer.
your car's there all day or a weekend.
And it's not a huge burden on the load.
Right.
Because you don't need all that those kilowatts coming all at once for the fast charge. I hadn't even thought.
Prior to COVID, just because, that lot particularly, Colleen that was an extremely popular lot at Exit 5 prior to COVID.
Yeah.
To go to Logan, and
Yeah.
no offense to
Right.
Manchester Airport, and I go to Manchester Airport too, but this whole debate about flights and all that kind of stuff, like flying out of Logan and the cost, and I know Manchester's trying to do a great job to improve that, but sometimes people would just go into that airport at Logan and park in Londonderry or in Salem, and the two stops to Salem and taking the bus or the trains.
Well, I think, it's an interesting idea about, locating out, level one, a place where you're parked for a long time.
Yeah.
It might just be as simple as providing weatherproof outlets, at some of those locations.
One last thing, I talk too much. What Julian said too, going to locations, I thought when she said the sport, what about like event centers? Like it's opening up again after COVID, that people are starting to go to event centers, and they may go to a business meeting and go to, spend the day, and you have a business day and you get out at 4:30, you park your car there from 8, 9 in the morning if you're at a conference all day. And then granted it's private sector, but I know in Derry's case, and Colleen gets it in London, but COVID's changed things, and there's more people, like all these new event centers want to pop up. I hope they all do well, but they're all kind of like, they want to be more like outdoor stuff, and they're trying to get away from some of the indoor stuff, and have smaller venues that people are not on top of each other like they were with COVID.
Can you give me an example of event centers in the region?
Well, for selfish reasons, LaBelle Winery. There's one in Amherst, the original store, and there's one in Portsmouth. But Amy LaBelle opened up one in Derry on the Derry Windham Atkinson line on Route 111, and she's doing excellent. They're gangbusters. They're doing really well.
One in the Amherst, Bedford.
Yeah, but she's done it, and and Jillian, she's done extremely well. She's excellent in terms of marketing, and that place is now busy 7 days a week.
Okay.
But it's on 111, right in the small section of Derry on the Windham line, North Salem. And I don't know, Zach, I think you did show it. Yeah, right there. They just opened this past year. There'll be a year in May, but that made me think of the event center. Like there's somebody, and you go on 111 west, and you get to exit 3 on the highway in Windham under the new 111 bypass to the town of Windham.
Is that something that would be listed in that?
It would, I'm not sure what that would be under.
Right, that's
So
so we got these codes, economic development.
we have a listing of, all the
Business
businesses
codes.
in the state, and we have, typically up to 5 industry codes with each business, but sometimes it's, hard to figure out.
Yeah.
Just even if something, a Walmart is listed has, they sell a lot of different stuff, and there's not a general, so if you want a grocery store, the Walmart might not be under there because they've got 5 different things, and then that would be the 6th or whatever, but that doesn't make the cut.
Yeah, when you said event center, I didn't know exactly what they are, but this could also be places where there's like weddings.
She's called it events, like in her case specific. It is a winery, like some of the Amherst, but it's now called. She's got 3 buildings. She purchased an existing golf course, so one building is called the winery, and then she has the event center, and they do nothing but events all day long there. And then
we can research what the heck it's.
Yeah, it's worth going just to go. I know I don't want to keep plugging for Amy LaBelle, but it's worth going.
Perfect. These are the type of things we just hadn't thought of. Liquor stores and winery event centers. Perfect.
Future train stations.
Okay.
We did add the new highway exits in there, so you see like exit 4A is there. Although there's nothing. There's nothing actually there at the moment. Right. Exit 7.
Mostly, Colleen, have you heard the rumor that 4A that you'll see the construction crew this spring starting in the Londonderry end on the highway?
Demoing.
Yeah, and is there construction happening right now? Because I know it's out to bid, correct, for that first
Yeah,
mile?
Dave Karen, the town manager in Derry, yes, like also the demos on the housing in Derry is going to start this spring. They've been to the summer. But he
Okay,
said something that you may actually see a construction crew on the highway in Londonderry, like come May and June supposedly, to start phase one.
finally moving ahead.
Yeah,
Took a few years.
It's a long time coming.
yes.
Well, if anything else comes to mind or right now or in the next 10 minutes? I'm gonna get back to the PowerPoint, I guess.
Yeah.
Thanks, Zach. Yeah, unless anybody had anything specific, any specific questions about these corridors, and I'm gonna cover them. Thanks, Cam. Again, the list, you know, we haven't included everything, but, and that may, you know, if somebody feels strongly about one that we've missed, for example, 28 through Londonderry. I think didn't shout it out in Manchester or up to Hooksett either.
Can you guys see the PowerPoint on Zoom?
Yep, look
Alright.
good.
Okay, all right, cue up the next, let's just see where we get to. Okay, keep going. Keep going. All right, right here. So this is what we have so far. This is what we've mapped at least. And we've begun the analysis on. As I mentioned, I-93 from Hooksett to Manchester. But again, now we're also, from what Tim said, it looks like I've got it in the lower section here of SNHPC fast charging corridors, Route 111 to Wyndham. So that's in. Then 101 Manchester, Bedford, and 101 Manchester to Candia. It's basically the extensive 101 in our region. And again, you know, because you can't locate it on anywhere on 101 east of Manchester or even in Manchester, it's really just within, this is a mile, but I think it was a quarter mile that we mapped. And I think, you know, just going back to that quarter mile, we're starting with a quarter mile and maybe we expanded eventually. It's just that a quarter mile seemed, you know, based on the analysis we did, we found a bunch of locations that would be logical, but maybe if we look out a little bit further, we might find opportunities that are more feasible, I guess it would be the way to put it. So then beyond just the designated corridors from the state, we have 111 in Wyndham, 102, both from Derry to Chester and Derry and Londonderry, and then Route 114, Bedford, should say Goffstown, of course, Bedford, Goffstown through to Ware. So we did not include, as I mentioned, Route 3 isn't listed here, although I think we mapped it. Is that right? Is that, yeah, we mapped. So Route 3 was intended to be on this list. 28, we don't have. What else? Any other routes in your towns that we should include?
28 would be, I mean, at 28 corridor, again, from Londonderry southbound or from exit 5 down to Derry, it's a mile or so, give or take. And that's like a major corridor from Londonderry down to Derry into our major commercial industrial developments, Walmart's, Hannaford. That's like the core of the commercial zone on the Derry Londonderry line.
Okay.
I believe we didn't include 28 and, you know, similar 128 or something like that. If there was a north, we have a north-south corridors in the highways, and so we were prioritizing around those.
Yeah, no, that's cool.
Whereas, you know, 102, there's no east-west.
Right.
You know, there's 101 kind of, but you know, there's not
Yeah.
really an east-west for the same way.
Yeah.
So that's why 102 and 111 is in there.
Oh,
But 28 cuts north-south through, that includes Londonderry but it's parallel to 93. That's
It goes Wyndham all the way up to.
yeah, actually.
Yeah, it comes down into Wyndham too and into Salem, and there's a good amount of retail development that we could look to target as well.
all right. It sounds like there's a 28 we should.
Yeah, it goes right through downtown Derry, like Zach said, and into Alex. It goes right down to the Mass line in Salem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
One thing too, sorry, I was trying to multitask earlier.
That's right.
I apologize when you guys were brainstorming sites to look at. I would look at maybe office buildings or industrial parks. We have an office building or two here in Wyndham, and then some like manufacturing or industrial areas that employees probably spend at least 6 to 8 hours parked at. So might be a good thing to look at.
Okay.
Carl,
thank
this is Tim. I would
Yep.
probably also agree with Alex in that I would think that you would probably want to focus your efforts not only on specific corridors, but also specific locations within the region. I mean, based upon the feedback that I've received from people regarding the need for DC fast charging in your region over the past, I guess, well, probably 3 or 4 years, I would think that any inventory you would want to be putting together in terms of a location should include the hooks at rest areas. I can't think of a site in your region that would be better suited for obvious reasons to
Right.
having non-proprietary DC fast charging. So I would think that there would be other sites too that you would want to include, perhaps not, focusing on corridor based, but on specific sites. So.
Okay. Yeah. So with that in mind, either now or later, if you have any specific sites, I mean, obviously a lot of towns have industrial parks or office parks. We can find those. But if there's anything unusual,
Did you say, or Tim, maybe, did you guys did someone mention about going back? I thought it was a great idea, the state properties, because you mentioned about state recreation or state parks that would get a lot of usage, particularly.
yeah.
Not in this.
Just thinking out loud here, Carl, because it would be like, most chances are people are gonna be there longer than a half hour or 45 minutes, especially if it's a state park and they're gonna go there for recreation for a few hours or a day, or even like, maybe Tim might know, like state properties themselves, like that are owned by
George,
the state. Yes, Tim?
maybe what I was going to say was, and maybe Jessica or Ricky can remember this. One of the other states in northern New England, it's either Vermont or Maine, was developing a program to install, I think, level 2 charging at their state parks. That can either of you recall which one it was?
Sounds like Vermont.
Probably.
I'm going with Vermont.
Yeah, I'll because I know I received an email about it. I'll see if I can track it down. So.
Yeah, it doesn't ring a bell with Maine, Tim, to be honest, and it sounds like, but I don't know. I'm just guessing.
I'll see what I can find.
Yeah, no, it's a good one. Since we're talking about state properties, and I'm asking you, Tim, Jess and Ricky, is the state looking at putting them at like the VA hospitals, because people linger, they spend a lot of time there, or other, other places where the public gets state services? Interestingly
enough, the discussion you had a little bit earlier about the state liquor stores was actually, I have actually heard, yeah, there was interest about that. So.
Okay, but not necessarily. What about at I'm trying to think of the universe of state facilities where the public uses them besides liquor stores, which is a brilliant one. but that's why I went to mental health, VA.
Well, I mean,
federal, I get it, but
we do have a CMAQ project right now, which is proposing to install level 2 chargers at a couple of the state office parks in Concord, as well as up at Cannon Mountain in Laconia. So, I mean, state office facilities are certainly up at the top of our list, because our assumption is that they would serve a dual purpose in that they could be used to charge state vehicles overnight, and then they would also be available for similar charging as well as use by the public during the day.
Yeah, okay.
And especially with kind of the recreation facilities and state parks being mentioned, maybe once your Pathways to Play project that's going to be kicking off, that could end up being something that if you identify recreation facilities, we might be able to say, hey, which ones of these would be, potential great locations for EV charging, or even documenting if there are currently charging stations at, like, I don't know if any, municipal ball fields or other things happen to have have existing stations, maybe add that just as a good data point for you guys to collect in that Pathways to Play project too.
It's a great suggestion, Colin, and to be
Great
honest, I
suggestion.
did not think about that. But
We should have, a pretty good list here as soon as I create it. But
Project
the-
cross pollination.
Yeah.
The only possible problem with state parks and, parks in general is you want to have some place where you have pretty good visibility and, high frequency of people, because having, made a lot of signs and stuff for US forests and stuff like that, then that, the amount of vandalism on a,
Right.
on a $10 sign versus a
$100,000.
$100,000 charger.
Yeah.
Pretty significant.
Has the state ever provided a listing of how many electric car owners there are and what towns they are located in to find out where the heavy population is?
Yeah, I was just about to say, Tim, is there a resource for that?
We get data from the from the DMV, and we're currently soliciting assistance to develop that data into a usable package. It's kind of a work in progress right now, but I mean, we do receive the data. There are certain limitations on the extent to which we can release it, but I mean, that's kind of an ongoing project that we have right now. So
Even just knowing how many in a town, you don't need to know where they live, just how many are in a town and what's the growth factor.
yeah, I mean, I think we have that. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well,
I think that would be helpful.
yeah, that'd be helpful. Well, just to stay somewhat on time here, which we've done a great job at. The last discussion question really was, what else, and kind of touching on it here, what else should we include in this analysis, or whether or not it's where to locate them, not just factors as far as distance between places or proximity to something, but just, is there anything that we're missing more broadly, or you can think about in this process that we, like economic development opportunities is a logical, or the big one was a need for, do the towns need model ordinances on, on site locating, or of some analysis of best practices? Not that it's within the scope,
Yeah.
but it's something that we could identify and perhaps do it, parallel or within a different budget, or expand this budget in scope. So just to give you some prompts on what we mean by what else is important, and I think we've touched on some.
As I sit here listening, what's going through my head is the cost of whoever agrees to have this on their site, and what will it cost them? Because I know in the last project that we were doing, there was a cost to the property owner for installation and maintenance and things like that. So I think that's one of the first questions. If you speak with a business to say, hey, you're interested in this, the first thing they're going to think of is, what's this going to cost me?
Yeah.
So I don't know that we have any of that yet, but it's just something to look at.
Yeah, it's both the installation cost and then the ongoing cost, and I think that's why many of the private vendors of these devices, where you purchase it, but then they manage the whole.
And that's why in Hooksett, we were successful in getting Walmart to agree, because, such a large company. However, people were commenting saying, do you really think people going to Walmart will be driving an electric car?
Yes.
So you have to kind of look at that too.
Yeah, there's an education component, I know that much.
I think getting the state travel and tourism on board with this and highly involved is gonna be critical. Because right now, with the price of gas, more and more people are looking into electric vehicles. And right now, without the infrastructure, it's a significant group of people that aren't gonna be traveling from Massachusetts up to the White Mountains because they have a place to charge their car. So it only would make sense for travel and tourism to get behind this.
It's a great idea. Thanks, Jody.
To call what you touched on for Derry's case, like Joanne said, our economic development director, Bev Donovan, who I know you've worked with on some stuff, she's been an advocate for this from the beginning, since she's been in Derry now. like 4 years now, but on a side thing, when in Derry's case, Tesla came and they put 2 charging stations. It was part of their program, and they actually installed them. They paid for them. They donated the 2, and Carl knows where they are. But they were put on the municipal parking lot at the town hall in downtown. A great location. It was underutilized. And I'll get more information for our next meeting. But our town council last year decided to stop that because it was taxpayer money that was paying to maintain those, and they weren't getting the usage. And the cost, from what I heard this morning, was and I'm not good on the per whatever, how you ever charge them, was going through the roof. It went from like 16 up to like $90. Does that sound right?
Do you mean like the cost of the actual electricity provided?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah, I think that's just electricity costs have been going up because demand was
so low. So in theory, we're charging the Derry tax grid. Not that there was an outcry, but the town council said we, in theory, like the whole charging station concept, but they didn't want to pay for it. So as Carl knows, they stopped it last year. So
Have they ever talked about charging? Having it people pay for the charging?
that's what I think they didn't say no. They put exactly that. They said maybe we need to look at that and explore this more. But this group may be a good opportunity to come back at some point and say we've looked at this over the next 5 months, and but the cost factor was critical.
And that's where these, George's case, the town just needs to engage a private vendor, EVgo or one of the
yeah.
They install, there's a cost, I believe, to install it, but then they manage the whole the charging of the electricity and all the billing and all.
Yeah.
What Derry had was just anybody could park in this parking space and plug in, and it was zero cost to the person plugging in, which was, when they did their initial numbers, it wasn't going to be a huge impact, or was it right? They knew that there was going to be a cost.
They did, but I think what happened was it wasn't utilized by many people. And the second part was what people were doing. We were finding out, again, good and bad stories, that people were parking there overnight. We had one person that was a town official, ironically, that was going with his wife to Portsmouth to bring her to work, and she was leaving her car there like 24 hours. And so, of course, that whole political part could into it. Like, here's yes, former town council. This is a couple years ago. He's no longer here, but that's the stuff that's the real world, the practical sense. The political part gets into this.
Yep.
And they felt that, well, it's not really being utilized and it's being abused by certain people. So.
So I think what was being referenced there is the demand charge issue that's
yes,
been happening with, yeah. So there's an interesting webinar that Clean Energy New Hampshire put on, and Chris Skoglund, who used to work here at DES and now works as a policy person at Clean Energy New Hampshire, kind of dives into these current dockets that are before the Public Utilities Commission from the utilities. Each of them, Liberty Utilities, Unitil, and Eversource, are proposing some demand charge alternatives, and he kind of digs into that a little bit more. So I can put a link to that recording of that webinar, and his presentation is after mine. So I talked on there about the NEVI funding that's coming down from the infrastructure bill, if anybody's interested in that, because there are 2 phases for that funding. And I think phase 2 may tackle more of what you guys are looking to plan, is this community-based charging and identifying locations that may be eligible under that funding. So that may be a good resource for you all to tap into if you'd like to learn more about those.
Great, thank you, Jess. And yeah, in the notes that go out after this, I'll include that as well. Well, we're reaching the end here, everyone. It's just really a matter of, I think, if you have any other thoughts after today, and once you get the notes and everything, something we missed, let me know. The scope for this includes 3 or 4 meetings. And I emphasize the or, because we don't know if we will need 4 meetings with all of us in person, but we figure we budgeted for 4. We may need to do some kind of subgroup or something like that. But I think the next step we'll do some further analysis and perhaps get an idea of some actual locations, along all these corridors. And we'll probably do, whatever. We won't have any threshold of distance. We'll just say, here are all the most viable now. And then it's gonna narrow itself down, I think, naturally over time to what locations. But we'll add liquor stores, you know, we'll add some of these additional places and maybe engage some of those, whoever the representatives are, those, you know, at the liquor store, just use that great example. At event centers, you know, once we have a list of those types of places, but I think it's really going to be to generate a list of these locations. The scope does not include actually working specifically with those owners necessarily, perhaps with the state or the municipalities. Basically, again, the low hanging fruit of that which is our natural places for engagement, which is not the private sector. But through you, we might, you know, if you're like, hey, you know, I've got a guy there's a new development coming up, or so-and-so just came to the planning office and he's interested in a charger at LaBelle Wineries, you know, whatever it is, then obviously then we can flag that as you know, a green light, you know, kind of the one of the products at the end of this will be locations and then the likelihood that something could happen there rapidly. And we'll probably just do something, you know, red, yellow, green, Nate suggested, just real high level. And we'll then maybe under another scope under the next phase or with other money, then start to engage or through with the state, you know, once they've got some of their work done, collaborate and work on some of those locations. So I think, you know, we've probably got a month or two. We want to wrap this up. Ideally in August or September at the latest. There's no hurry, but there's no, you know, the money's not endless. This is a $20,000 special project. The door has been left open that we could ask for more money through our UPWP, our budget to do, if there was more to do. But we'll work with this list and expand it to include, well, 3, which isn't there, and 28. So I don't have an exact time when we'll reschedule, but I mean, reschedule to do the next meeting, but I imagine it will be sometime in late April or between late April and June, something like that. When we have a lot more data and information, and we'll probably be reaching out to some of you to actually, you know, once we've kind of narrowed it down to some locations to just kind of find out the history, if it's a private location, or work with you specifically on municipal locations or other government or public facilities within your town, that kind of thing. And then of course, and not every town is represented on this working group. So we're going to need to work with you, you know, John, what you know, where or who to talk to and where. I mean, we know somewhat, but you know, that kind of idea. Andrew's on this working group from Chester.
Oh, yes, I saw his name on
I
there.
can't remember if he couldn't make it or what, but you know, just that not every town is represented, and we'll maybe work with you or just to get contact names if you know somebody in an adjacent town or something like that. So yeah, so I don't have a definitive date or time for the next meeting, but just wanted to give you that kind of a the schedule. I can include that in the communication to you.
I do want to say, I agree with Jody. I think, you know, the timing, they say in life, what's going on with the gas prices in the Ukraine situation. I mean, there might, I mean, this is perfect timing, because people may say, I can't drive $5 or $6 a gallon if it stays, even if it goes back to 3 something, it's still higher than it ever used to be.
Well, this is just going to accelerate, you know, it is good timing in the sense that, you know, it would be better timing if we had more stations available already. Yeah. But you know, it's just going to accelerate it. And so, you know,
Well, if the
here we go.
infrastructure is there, then then more people will, like out in California, more people probably drive electric cars than anything, because everywhere you go, there's a charging station, even in Vermont. I was just in Burlington, and the business we were at, literally every person in the employee parking lot had a Tesla plugged in, just because it's there. And you know, if the infrastructure there, I would probably buy an electric vehicle, but until
it's a huge barrier.
Yeah.
So, and I do want to, you know, I do want to provide some more research about the economic development aspects of it, and you know how it attracts businesses and that kind of stuff. And Jody, the planner, environmental development director here, we'll reach out, look at some of that as well.
Yeah, Manchester's definitely, like I said, they don't regulate it, and I don't think they're redoing the zoning ordinance right now. I would hate to see something go into it, because then I feel like if you put it in the zoning ordinance, then it is kind of regulating where it can go. So right now it's just an electrical permit. You just have to show that it's not gonna
meet code.
Pretty much, yeah.
Once you start regulating it, then it makes it, you know, more difficult for people, and sort of doesn't have the welcoming feeling.
Yeah, I think, you know, we could develop some guidelines around encouragement and incentivizing. That's how I think of it, because it's, you know, the electrical code aspect to it is gonna.
It's almost like the solar panel, and I know for old timers like myself, it took years to get support. Everybody off the record would kind of, you know, fluff it off, so to speak, and they didn't take it seriously. And you know, again, you see how it's progressed to a point where, you know, Derry has a solar farm on a closed landfill that it's saving us thousands of dollars in electricity now. This happened this past year. And it's got support for people in town that you never thought would have supported it. But it took many years to get to that level. And like Joanne and Jody said, we didn't want to put it in our zoning ordinance originally because people felt if you make it mandatory or regulatory, so we encouraged it. So now we put in the regs and it encouraged it. And you go into the town hall, you get an electrical permit, you get inspected by the town.
Yep.
And we're slowly seeing more individual homeowners coming in to put solar panels on their properties.
Our town just adopted
You know,
a solar ordinance yesterday.
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so, yeah, good for you, Joanne.
Which I was surprised because I had lots of questions from people thinking, you know, how is this going to affect me? But it made it through.
Our time is lapsed. Thank you so much. Again, if you've got anything else after this you want to share, just email me. Same thing with all you out there. Thanks to all the NHDES folks. Good to see you guys. It's great having you here. And I'll stay tuned. I'll try and get the notes out within a timely fashion, and anybody can add. Again, if I missed something important, we'll try and throw all those links in that you put in the chat. And I'll try to let you know about scheduling, do another doodle poll. I think for something in probably late April or early May. It won't be too much time, but it's not going to be in like a week or two. So, all right. Well, thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.